When a warrior trained to kill humans steps into a dimension where humans don't exist anymore, the rules change fast. The ground splits open. The air tastes like copper and ash. Here, even gods bow to something older than chakra, something that feeds on every soul it touches. So what happens when a world built on stolen power meets the one thing that never forgives corruption? The sky above the Valley of the End tore open like flesh beneath a blade. Katsuro Hyuga saw it first through the Byakugan's all-seeing meridians, his vision penetrating chakra networks and spatial boundaries alike as he knelt beside a dying Iwanin whose lungs had filled with blood. The rupture manifested not as a portal or summoning seal, but as a fundamental violation of reality itself, a wound in the fabric of existence that bled light the color of molten iron. The air pressure changed. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight, their hearts stopped by some cosmic weight pressing down upon the world. The medic's hands froze over his patient's chest as he watched through his bloodline's penetrating sight something massive step through the tear. The figure stood within an aura of such concentrated violence that chakra itself recoiled. Katsuro's Byakugan registered the anomaly in layers of incomprehension. No chakra network threaded through the armored form, no tanketsu points marked its body, no flow of spiritual or physical energy animated its limbs. Instead, the figure radiated something older than chakra, a force that his eyes translated as writhing amber currents laced with geometries that hurt to perceive. The armor was green, scarred, and impossibly dense. The helmet bore no face, only a visor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. In one gauntleted hand, the figure held a weapon Katsuro's experience could not classify. Too large to be practical, too brutal to be a tool, shaped like violence given form and purpose. The Iwanin beneath his hands convulsed once and died. Katsuro did not notice. His attention had fractured into terror and fascination as the armored giant stepped fully into the shinobi world, and the rupture sealed behind him with a sound like a scream cut short. The figure surveyed the battlefield with methodical precision, helmet turning in slow arcs that suggested calculation rather than curiosity. 300 meters away, a squadron of Konoha Anbu engaged a cell of Kiri Hunter Nin in a dance of steel and lightning. Neither side had yet noticed the arrival. The wind carried the smell of ozone and copper. The sun, occluded by smoke from burning forests, painted everything in shades of ash and amber. The armored figure began to walk. His gait was neither hurried nor hesitant. Each step covered 3 meters with mechanical efficiency, boots crushing stone to powder beneath their weight. The super shotgun hung at his side, mag-locked to armor plates etched with symbols that seemed to shift when observed peripherally. Behind him, the valley floor showed no footprints, only impact craters where his weight had compressed earth beyond its structural limits. Katsuro felt his medical training scream warnings his conscious mind could not yet articulate. This was not a summon. This was not a Jinchuriki. This was something that existed outside the framework of shinobi combat entirely. The Konoha Anbu noticed him first. Kat, the squadron leader, pivoted mid-strike and threw 3 kunai in a textbook interception pattern. The blades closed on the armored giant with perfect trajectory and timing, each one aimed for gaps in the plating that Kat's trained eye had identified in the span of a heartbeat. The kunai struck armor and shattered. Not deflected, shattered. The metal fragmented as though it had struck something infinitely harder than steel, and the shards fell smoking to the ground. The armored figure did not slow. He did not acknowledge the attack. He simply continued his approach with the inexorability of a falling mountain. Kat's partner, Hawk, completed a rapid series of hand seals and exhaled a great fireball that could melt stone. The jutsu roared across the space between them, chakra-enhanced flames hot enough to turn sand to glass. The inferno struck the armored giant dead center and parted around him like water around a boulder. Heat and pressure washed outward in concentric rings, igniting dry grass and warping the air itself. But when the flames dissipated, the figure stood unchanged. Not even his armor showed scorch marks. The green plating remained pristine, untouched, as if the fire had been nothing more than a mild inconvenience beneath his notice. The Kiri Hunter Nin had paused their assault to watch. 7 elite shinobi, masters of silent killing, stood frozen in a loose semicircle as they processed what they had witnessed. One of them, a woman whose sword dripped with paralytic toxin, spoke in a voice carefully stripped of emotion. "Retreat pattern Delta. Regroup at the marker stone." It was the correct tactical decision. Unknown threat, unknown capabilities, minimal intelligence. Standard doctrine demanded withdrawal and reconnaissance. The armored figure raised his right arm. What happened next lasted 3 seconds and redefined the boundaries of possible violence. The weapon attached to his gauntlet was neither kunai launcher nor chakra cannon, but something that seemed to translate pure concept into kinetic reality. The barrel assembly was thick as a man's thigh, lined with cooling vents that glowed with that same amber light. Katsuro's Byakugan struggled to categorize. When the weapon fired, it did not produce a beam or bullet, but a lance of coherent force that existed in the space between energy and matter. The argent beam punched through the first Kiri Hunter Nin and continued through the boulder behind him and through the cliff face beyond that. The body simply ceased to exist from the sternum up. No blood spray, no burning. The molecular bonds holding matter together had been disrupted so completely that flesh, bone, and armor had been rendered into component particles too fine to perceive. The Hunter Nin's legs stood upright for half a second before toppling sideways. The smell was indescribable, something like ozone and burnt copper, and a metallic tang that made Katsuro's hindbrain shriek warnings about radiation that the shinobi world had no framework to understand. The remaining 6 Kiri Nin scattered with the desperate efficiency of apex predators who had suddenly realized they were prey. They moved in 6 different directions, employing the mist signature concealment techniques as they disappeared into banks of chakra-generated fog and shadow. It was textbook evasion, the product of decades of accumulated tactical wisdom, and it bought them exactly 4 seconds of life. The armored figure tracked them with movements that suggested sensory capabilities far beyond normal human perception. His helmet turned, paused, turned again. The targeting system integrated into his visor painted each fleeing shinobi with markers invisible to normal sight, but clear as daylight to the ancient technology threaded through his armor. He fired again. The argent beam caught the second Kiri Nin mid-leap, vaporizing her from hip to crown in a cascade of disintegrating matter. The third died as he attempted to substitute with a log, the beam catching him in the fractional second of vulnerability when body and replacement occupied overlapping positions in space. The wooden substitute exploded into splinters. The shinobi's chakra network flared once in Katsuro's vision and went dark. The fourth attempted a water clone technique and died alongside all 6 duplicates when the beam passed through the formation without distinguishing between real and false. The fifth made it 10 meters further than his comrades before a second shot reduced him to scattered atoms. The 6th and 7th Kiri Nin tried to fight. They converged from opposite angles in a synchronized assault that would have overwhelmed most jonin. Tanto blades coated in neurotoxin, kunai strung with explosive tags, senbon needles aimed for the gaps Kat had targeted earlier. The attack was flawless in conception and execution. It died stillborn against physics that shinobi training had never anticipated. The armored giant moved. Not with the fluid grace of taijutsu or the supernatural speed of the body flicker, but with mechanical precision that turned combat into geometry. He stepped inside the first Hunter Nin's guard, caught the descending Tanto with his left gauntlet, and crushed it to powder. His right fist drove into the man's sternum with force that folded the ribcage inward like wet paper. The 6th Kiri Nin died before his partner's body hit the ground. The armored figure had drawn a weapon from his back in a motion too fast to track clearly. It was a sword, if something that massive and brutal could be called a sword. The blade was 8 feet of serrated adamantium that vibrated at frequencies designed to shear molecular bonds. The crucible ignited as it cleared its housing, wreathing itself in flames that burned not with heat but with something deeper and more terrible. The sword passed through the 7th Hunter Nin in a diagonal arc that separated shoulder from hip, and where the blade cut, matter simply ceased to resist. The body fell in 2 distinct pieces that cauterized instantly, sealing themselves in obsidian char. The Konoha Anbu had not moved. Cat and Hawk stood paralyzed, not by fear but by the cognitive dissonance of watching their understanding of combat dissolve in real time. They had fought Sanin and Jinchuriki, had survived encounters with S-rank missing nin and tailed beast rampages. They understood the spectrum of shinobi violence from genin brawls to Kage-level devastation. This was something else. This was violence from outside their cosmology, enacted with weapons that bypassed chakra entirely and operated on principles their world had never encountered. The armored figure turned to face them. Katsuro watched through his Byakugan as Kat made the decision to speak rather than fight. It was, perhaps, the only reason Kat survived the next 60 seconds. The Anbu removed his mask in a gesture of respect that also communicated non-hostility, revealing a scarred face marked by decades of service. "Unknown entity," Kat said, voice steady despite the circumstances. "You have entered Konohagakure territory during wartime operations. Identify yourself and state your purpose." The armored giant said nothing. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of battle from the main engagement 2 kilometers north. The figure's helmet tracked from Cat to Hawk to the corpses scattered across the valley floor. Whatever sensory system lay behind that visor was cataloging them with the detachment of a machine logging data. When the giant finally moved, it was not toward the ANBU but toward something Katsuro could not initially identify. Then the medic's Byakugan registered the anomaly. Beneath the valley floor, 30 meters down in a cavity that should not exist, something pulsed with corrupted chakra. The signature was wrong in ways that made Katsuro's eyes water. Threads of malignant energy that writhed like living things and radiated a wrongness, his bloodline translated as physical pain. The armored figure walked directly to the point above this hidden space and stopped. He raised one boot and brought it down with calculated force. The earth shattered. Layers of stone and compressed soil collapsed inward as the figure's strike propagated through geological strata with seismic precision. The cavity below had been sealed with barrier techniques that dated back to the Second Great Ninja War, markers indicating it held something the Konoha forces had deemed too dangerous to destroy but too necessary to abandon. Those barriers lasted exactly as long as it took the armored giant's boot to connect with the capstone. The chamber opened. Inside, bound in chains, forged from chakra-reactive metal and wrapped in suppression seals that glowed with fading light, crouched something that had once been human. Its chakra signature registered in Katsuro's vision as a mass of writhing corruption, demonic energy interwoven with human spiritual pathways in configurations that should have been impossible. The creature's skin had split in places to reveal musculature that moved independently of conscious thought. Its eyes were black pits that leaked vapor the color of old blood. It had been a Konoha shinobi once, volunteered or conscripted into an experiment that attempted to weaponize demonic chakra siphoned from one of the tailed beasts during the last war. The experiment had succeeded too well. The creature lunged upward through the broken stone with strength that snapped its restraints like thread. It moved with the fluid savagery of something that existed purely to inflict harm, claws extended, mouth distending to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Demonic chakra erupted from its form in waves that corrupted the grass where it touched, turning living plants into blackened husks. Cat and Hawk scattered, recognizing a threat they had encountered only in classified briefings marked with the highest security restrictions. The armored figure did not move. The creature closed half the distance between them before the giant raised his left arm and discharged the plasma rifle. The weapon's report was not an explosion but a tearing sound, as if reality itself protested the violence being enacted upon it. Superheated plasma crossed the intervening space at a significant fraction of light speed and struck the creature center mass. The demonic entity's flesh vaporized. Its chakra network, visible to Katsuro's Byakugan, flared brilliantly as it attempted to regenerate damage too catastrophic to heal. The effort failed. The plasma burned too hot, disrupted too deeply. The creature's scream was a sound of pure betrayal and confusion as it realized it could not adapt, could not evolve, could not survive. The armored figure walked forward as the creature burned. He drew the super shotgun with his right hand, the weapon-racking shells that gleamed with amber light. At point-blank range, with the creature still thrashing in its death throes, he fired. The shells were not filled with lead, but with argent-charged pellets designed to disrupt demonic matter at the quantum level. The blast caught what remained of the creature's head and upper torso and reduced both to a fine mist that ignited in mid-air. The body collapsed, still burning, and the armored figure stood over it for 3 full seconds before turning away. He had not said a word. Cat and Hawk exchanged a glance weighted with unspoken communication. Whatever this thing was, it had just destroyed in seconds what would have required a full strike team and acceptable casualties to contain. The implications were staggering. The being clearly possessed either the ability to sense demonic corruption or had arrived specifically to purge it. Either option suggested an intelligence and purpose behind the violence, but neither explained the origin, allegiance, or ultimate objective of something that operated so far outside shinobi paradigm. The armored figure turned north, toward the sounds of the main battle. "Wait," Cat said, taking 1 step forward. It was perhaps the bravest or most foolish thing he had ever done, and he was never entirely certain which. The giant paused, did not turn, did not acknowledge the speaker beyond the simple fact of stopping. Cat pressed on. "The war, the fighting ahead. Those are not demons. Those are shinobi, human beings, soldiers fighting for their villages and their—" The armored figure resumed walking. He moved with that same mechanical precision, each step covering ground with relentless efficiency. Cat did not pursue, neither did Hawk. They understood, with the instinct of survivors, that they had been dismissed not out of contempt, but because they were simply irrelevant to whatever calculus drove this being. The giant crested the ridge that separated the Valley of the End from the broader battlefield beyond and disappeared from their direct line of sight. Katsuro finally remembered to breathe. His hands were shaking. The Iwa Nin, whose corpse still lay at his feet, had gone cold, blood pooling in congealing patterns that his medical training catalogued automatically. Around him, the valley had gone silent. No birds sang, no insects chirped. The world itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the armored figure reached the war. The medic did not have to wait long. 2 kilometers north, the main engagement had reached the brutal stalemate that characterized the Fourth Great Ninja War's worst battles. 700 shinobi from 4 villages clashed in formations that shifted like living organisms, adapting to terrain and opponent with the fluid grace of those trained from childhood to kill and die. The field was a nightmare of competing elements, walls of earth rising to block waves of water, forests burning beneath fireballs the size of houses, lightning cutting through mist while wind scoured flesh from bone. The dead numbered in the dozens already, their bodies scattered across a landscape that bore the scars of jutsu powerful enough to reshape geography. Into this maelstrom walked the Doomslayer. His arrival did not interrupt the battle so much as create a pocket of sudden stillness, a spreading circle of combatants who stopped mid-technique to stare at the armored figure, striding across no man's land with complete disregard for tactical positioning or cover. Kunai fell from nerveless fingers, Hand seals froze half-formed. For 5 seconds, an entire battlefield held its breath. Then someone, a young Sunar Chunin whose nerves had frayed past breaking, threw a kunai. The blade struck the Slayer's chestplate and shattered exactly as Kat's had, but the sound carried across the field and broke the spell. Dozens of shinobi from all sides reacted with the instinctive aggression of those trained to eliminate unknown threats. A barrage of shuriken and kunai darkened the air. Fire and wind techniques converged on the giant from multiple angles. The ground beneath his feet erupted as an Earth-style user attempted to swallow him in closing jaws of stone. The Doomslayer raised the super shotgun and began to fire. Each pull of the trigger sent argent-charged pellets across the battlefield in expanding cones of molecular disruption. The first blast caught a cluster of Iwa Nin mid-charge and scattered them across 20 meters of scorched earth as unrecognizable fragments. The second sheared through a conjured water dragon and the Chunin who had summoned it, reducing both to steam and ash. The third, fourth, and fifth shots answered the rain of projectiles with violence so disproportionate that it redefined the engagement entirely. The battlefield was no longer a contest of tactics and chakra. It had become an execution ground. A Konoha Jonin attempted a shadow clone assault. 20 identical copies attacked from every angle in a textbook application of overwhelming numerical advantage. The Doomslayer cycled to his plasma rifle mid-stride and fired in a sweeping arc that caught all 20 clones plus the original in a wall of superheated death. The plasma burned through flesh and chakra networks without distinguishing between real and false. And all 21 bodies collapsed simultaneously as their cellular structures broke down into constituent proteins. The sight broke something in the collective psyche of the assembled forces. Shinobi began to retreat, tactical discipline dissolving into survival instinct as combatants from all sides recognized the presence of something that rendered their training obsolete. They scattered in dozens of directions, employing every evasion technique their respective villages had developed over centuries of warfare. Substitution jutsu, underground travel, transformation, concealment, mist. The Doomslayer tracked them all. His helmet's targeting system painted retreating figures through stone and water and shadow, marking each one with geometric precision before he selected targets based on criteria invisible to shinobi perception. He killed those who radiated corrupted chakra first. There were more than Katsuro would have believed possible. Shinobi who had accepted demonic bargains for power, who had allowed fragments of tailed beast chakra to integrate improperly, who had undergone experiments that blurred the line between human and monster. The Doomslayer identified each one through methods that predated chakra by eons and executed them with mechanical efficiency. A Kirinin whose skin leaked black vapor died to a rocket that locked onto the demonic signature and detonated inside his chest cavity. 2 Iwa brothers who shared a corrupted seal network burned together under concentrated plasma fire. A Suna puppeteer whose wooden constructs moved with unnatural intelligence died when the BFG 9000 vaporized both master and creation in a sphere of emerald annihilation that left a perfectly circular crater 20 meters wide. The remaining forces attempted to mount a coordinated defense. 3 Jonin-level commanders from Konoha, Iwa, and Suna met in hurried conference and made the decision to treat the armored giant as the primary threat. They were not wrong. What followed was a display of elite shinobi combat that would have decided most engagements. Combined elemental techniques that created localized atmospheric phenomena, summoning scrolls calling forth creatures from the animal realms, genjutsu layers designed to trap even Kage-level opponents in recursive illusions. The Doomslayer walked through it all. Genjutsu broke against a mind that had endured hell's temptations for eons and emerged stronger. Summoned creatures recognized something in the armored figure that triggered primordial terror and refused their master's commands, vanishing in clouds of smoke without engaging. Elemental techniques met armor forged in the foundries of heaven and hell, and accomplished nothing beyond scorching the earth and killing friendly forces caught in the blast radius. One of the Jonin, a Konoha Ambu captain named Yugao, attempted a sword technique her sensei had developed to cut through any defense. The blade was chakra forged, sharp enough to part molecules, wielded with a lifetime's mastery. Yugao moved with the fluid grace of water finding its path. Her strike targeted for the gap between helmet and gorget, where she had identified a potential weak point. The sword connected. The blade shattered. Fragments of chakra metal peppered Yugao's face, and she stumbled backward in shock as the Doomslayer's left hand closed around her throat. He lifted her off her feet with casual strength that suggested he could have crushed her windpipe as easily as thought. For 3 seconds he held her there, visor angled to examine her chakra network through sensors that read energy signatures like text. Whatever he saw satisfied some internal criteria. He opened his hand and dropped her. Yugao collapsed, gasping, alive purely because she registered as human rather than corrupted. The Doomslayer stepped over her without a backward glance and continued toward the command tent where the war's orchestrators had established their strategic position. The tent's occupants had been monitoring the battle through a combination of sensory jutsu and messenger hawks. They knew the armored figure was approaching. They knew conventional forces had failed catastrophically to slow his advance. What they did not know was how to classify or counter a threat that existed outside every framework shinobi civilization had developed. The lead commander, a grizzled Iwa veteran named Kitsuchi, made the call that would define the next hour. Evacuate all non-essential personnel. Signal the Jinchuriki. Code Black authorization. The order meant unleashing a tailed beast. 5 kilometers west, contained within a reinforced seal matrix and guarded by elite forces, Roshi of Iwagakure felt the command pulse through his chakra network. The Four-Tails Jinchuriki closed his eyes, centered his breathing, and began the mental mantra that allowed controlled transformation. His body expanded, red chakra bubbling across skin that hardened into simian armor. Muscles swelled with power drawn from dimensions beyond normal space. Within seconds, Son Goku the Four-Tails stood fully manifested, a mountain of crimson chakra and primal rage that bellowed a challenge heard across 20 kilometers. The Doomslayer stopped walking. His helmet turned toward the west, sensors registering energy output that registered as demonic corruption wearing the skin of primate nobility. The tailed beast was not a demon in Hell's taxonomy, but it radiated sufficient malice and power to trigger response protocols buried so deep in the Slayer's psyche they predated language. He studied the approaching chakra signature for 3 seconds, categorizing threat level and prioritizing target acquisition. Then he began to run. The Doomslayer's sprint was not the supernatural speed of the body flicker, but rather the terrifying acceleration of something that mass should have rendered immobile. Each footfall struck with pile-driver force, leaving meter-deep impressions in earth compressed beyond its load-bearing capacity. He covered the 5 kilometers in 90 seconds, armor plating shedding heat from friction with air molecules superheated by his passage. Son Goku saw him coming and attacked. The Four-Tails' first strike was a tailed beast bomb, a sphere of compressed chakra containing destructive force equivalent to a small tactical nuclear device. The beast gathered the energy in seconds, compressing malice and power into a ball that shimmered with reality-warping potential, and launched it directly at the approaching figure. The bomb crossed the intervening distance at supersonic velocity, trailing distortions in the air itself. The Doomslayer fired the BFG 9000. The weapon's discharge was not so much a projectile as a cascade of reality failure. Argent energy erupted from the barrel in a sphere of emerald brilliance that consumed the tailed beast bomb, overrode its chakra structure, and continued forward with momentum undiminished. The sphere struck Son Goku's center mass and detonated. Energy tendrils lanced outward from the impact point, seeking and destroying corrupted matter with prejudice that bypassed normal defensive measures. The four tails screamed. It was a sound of genuine agony, something the beast had not experienced in centuries of existence. The argent energy burned through chakra constructs that should have been inviolable, disrupting the quasi-demonic essence that animated the tailed beast's form. Son Goku's body began to destabilize, red chakra bleeding off in sheets that ignited the surrounding forest. The beast thrashed, four tails whipping in patterns that carved trenches through the landscape, but the damage was too fundamental to simply regenerate. For the first time since its creation by the Sage of Six Paths, the four tails experienced the possibility of true death. Roshi felt the beast's terror through their connection and made a choice. The Jinchuriki withdrew his chakra, forcibly sealing Son Goku back into the containment matrix before the argent energy could propagate through their link. The transformation reversed in seconds, leaving Roshi standing human and vulnerable in a crater still smoking from the BFG's discharge. He looked up at the approaching armored figure and prepared to die. The Doomslayer stopped 3 meters away. His visor angled down to examine the Jinchuriki, sensors cataloging the seal network binding human and beast, the residual corruption that bled through even the most sophisticated containment. Roshi stood perfectly still, hands empty, making no move toward weapons or technique. He had accepted his death with the calm of those who had lived too long in war to fear its end. The Doomslayer raised his right arm. The plasma rifle charged with a rising whine that set Roshi's teeth on edge. The barrel assembly glowed amber, heat distorting the air in concentric waves. The Jinchuriki closed his eyes and thought of his village, his comrades, the world he would leave behind. He wondered briefly if his death would be instant or if he would have time to feel the plasma eat through his flesh. Then the Doomslayer lowered his weapon and turned away. Roshi's eyes snapped open in shock. The armored figure was already walking back toward the main battlefield, dismissing the Jinchuriki as if he had been evaluated and found wanting of execution. It took Roshi 3 full seconds to understand what had happened. The giant had scanned him, recognized the human beneath the beast, and chosen mercy. Or not mercy exactly, but a kind of terrible discrimination that separated those who warranted death from those who did not. The distinction would reshape how shinobi understood themselves. Back at the command tent, Kitsuchi received reports of the encounter and felt the first stirrings of a strategic insight that terrified him. The armored figure was not attacking shinobi indiscriminately. It was hunting specific targets with criteria that suggested intelligence gathering beyond shinobi capabilities. Every confirmed kill shared common elements: corruption, demonic influence, or unnatural power gained through methods the villages had long classified as forbidden but never fully abandoned. The giant was purging them. Kitsuchi made the second most consequential decision of that day. He ordered a general ceasefire and dispatched runners to all command elements with orders to stand down and observe. The risk was enormous. Trusting an unknown entity during active combat went against every principle of military doctrine, but the alternative was continuing to feed troops into a meat grinder that was systematically eliminating personnel. Villages could not afford to lose. The ceasefire took 20 minutes to propagate across the scattered battlefield. During that time, the Doomslayer killed 17 more shinobi, each one marked by corruption so deep it had warped their chakra signatures into patterns that registered as demonic to his ancient senses. He moved through the battlefield like an avenging angel, identifying targets with precision that suggested access to information shinobi themselves did not possess. A medic who had been siphoning life force from dying patients to extend his own lifespan died to a rocket that tracked the stolen energy directly to its source. Asuna Jonin, whose puppet techniques drew power from bound human souls, burned under sustained plasma fire. 3 Kirinin, who had consumed the flesh of their victims to gain their abilities, died together when the crucible's blade carved through their formation in a single sweep. When the killing stopped, the battlefield lay silent. 400 shinobi from 4 villages stood in scattered clusters, weapons lowered, staring at the armored figure who stood alone in a field of corpses he had created. The dead numbered 63, each one eliminated with a precision that suggested moral calculus rather than indiscriminate slaughter. The survivors were beginning to understand, with growing horror, that the dead had been chosen, marked, judged by standards the shinobi world thought it had buried decades ago. Kitsuchi emerged from the command tent, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He walked across the scorched earth with the measured pace of someone approaching a wild animal, hands visible and empty. The Doomslayer watched him come, visor tracking the commander's approach with mechanical precision. Kitsuchi stopped 10 meters away. Just outside the range he estimated those gauntlets could reach in a lunge. "Unknown entity," Kitsuchi said, his voice carrying across the silent field. "You have killed 63 shinobi from multiple villages. You have engaged a tailed beast and survived. You have disrupted a battlefield engagement involving hundreds of combatants. Explain your purpose." The Doomslayer said nothing. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of incomprehension. Kitsuchi tried again, choosing words with the care of a diplomat navigating a minefield. "The individuals you killed, we have confirmed your targeting was not random. Each one shared certain characteristics, forbidden techniques, unnatural enhancements, connections to entities we do not fully understand. If you are hunting corruption, we can work together, share intelligence, coordinate efforts." The Doomslayer turned away. He walked north, toward the distant mountains where sensory reports had detected another concentration of corrupted chakra. Kitsuchi did not attempt to stop him. Neither did anyone else. They watched the armored figure stride across their battlefield and disappear beyond the ridgeline, leaving behind questions that would consume the shinobi world for years to come. Katsuro Hyuga arrived at the main battlefield 3 hours later. His Byakugan swept across the scene, cataloging injuries and mapping chakra signatures with the mechanical efficiency of someone retreating into professional detachment to avoid processing what he had witnessed. 63 corpses lay scattered across the field, each one bearing wounds his medical knowledge struggled to classify. Thermal damage beyond what fire techniques could produce. Molecular disruption suggesting forces that operated at scales beneath chakra's normal interaction layer. Traumatic injuries delivered with such precision they suggested an understanding of anatomy more complete than any medical text he had studied. One of the bodies caught his attention. The corpse had been a Konoha Chunin, recognizable from the forehead protector still tied around what remained of his head. Katsuro had treated this man for minor injuries 2 weeks earlier, had shared tea with him, had heard stories about his family waiting in the village. Now the man lay in pieces, killed not for his allegiance or tactical position but because his chakra signature had registered as corrupted. Katsuro activated his Byakugan and examined the body with clinical detachment. The corruption was there, subtle but unmistakable. Threads of wrong-colored chakra wound through the man's network, concentrated around a seal on his spine that dated back to an enhancement program the village had discontinued after too many subjects died in training. The seal was supposed to boost chakra capacity by tapping into latent reserves, but in practice it created a backdoor through which demonic energy could bleed into the host. Most shinobi who received the seal died within 5 years from chakra poisoning. This one had survived a decade. The corruption had been eating him from inside the whole time. The armored giant had known. Katsuro closed his eyes and pressed his palms together in a gesture of respect for the dead. When he opened them again, he was looking north, toward the mountains where the giant had disappeared. Something was happening that the medic did not fully understand, but his instincts honed by years of battlefield medicine and the Byakugan's all-seeing curse told him it was not over, not even close. In the mountains, 50 kilometers from the battlefield, the Doomslayer walked. His armor's sensors painted the terrain in overlapping layers of thermal, electromagnetic, and argent signatures. The natural world registered as background noise, harmless and irrelevant. But threaded through the peaks and valleys, hidden in caves and sealed chambers, pulsed concentrations of corruption that drew his attention with magnetic inevitability. Each source represented an experiment, a bargain, or a mistake that the shinobi world had made in its endless pursuit of power. He found the first cache after 6 hours of travel. The cave mouth was sealed with barrier techniques old enough that the kanji had worn nearly smooth, their power maintained more by inertia than active chakra. The Doomslayer placed one gauntleted hand against the stone and simply pushed. The barriers shattered like glass. Centuries of accumulated sealing expertise rendered meaningless by force, applied with sufficient conviction. The cave opened. Inside, suspended in tanks filled with preservative fluid, floated 17 failed experiments. They had been human once, volunteers or conscripts who had undergone procedures designed to integrate demon chakra directly into their bodies. The theory had been sound. If Jinchuriki could contain tailed beasts, perhaps normal shinobi could bond with lesser demons and gain proportional power. The practice had been catastrophic. The subjects had transformed into things neither human nor demon, suspended in a state of permanent transformation that destroyed their higher functions while preserving enough life to maintain the demonic link. The Doomslayer examined each tank with methodical thoroughness. His sensors catalogued the corruption threading through each twisted form, measuring the demonic signature against internal databases that predated human civilization. The measurements confirmed what he had suspected. These were not true demons, but rather humans corrupted beyond salvation, their souls devoured by entities wearing their flesh as camouflage. Mercy would be a blade, justice would be fire. He raised the super shotgun and began to fire. Each tank exploded in sequence, preservative fluid igniting under the argent charges before the rounds found their targets. The experiments died without waking, their corruption purged in flames that burned hot enough to reduce bone to ash. The cave filled with smoke that carried the smell of burning meat and something more acrid, the scent of demonic essence combusting as it lost its anchors in the physical world. Within 5 minutes, the chamber was empty of everything but scorch marks and the echoes of violence. The Doomslayer emerged from the cave and continued north. Over the next 48 hours, he found and destroyed 11 more sites. Each one represented a different failure, a different bargain, a different attempt by the shinobi world to weaponize forces it did not understand. A temple where priests had summoned what they thought were benign spirits, but were actually parasitic demons wearing masks of divinity. A research station where Orochimaru's disciples had attempted to synthesize demonic chakra from scratch, and instead created a viral corruption that turned test subjects into mindless cannibals. An abandoned fortress where root operatives had bound a greater demon into a seal matrix designed to create controllable super soldiers, only to discover the demon had been controlling them from the moment the binding completed. He killed everything he found, not with sadism or pleasure, but with the clinical efficiency of someone performing necessary surgery. The corruption was cancer. He was the scalpel. There was no cruelty in his methods, no hesitation, no mercy for things that wore human faces but housed demonic essence. Each site was cleansed with fire, plasma, and argent fury until nothing remained but ashes, and the fading screams of entities banished back to dimensions from which they should never have emerged. Word of his crusade spread. Survivors fled ahead of him, carrying reports that grew more exaggerated with each retelling. An unstoppable monster-hunting shinobi, a demon wearing armor, a weapon created by one village to destroy the others. The truth, when it finally pieced itself together through careful intelligence analysis, was somehow worse than any fiction. The armored figure was not targeting shinobi as such, it was hunting corruption. And the fact that it found so much suggested the shinobi world was far more compromised than anyone had admitted. The Five Cage convened an emergency summit. They met in Iron Country on neutral ground, each leader flanked by bodyguards and advisors who had vetted repeatedly for any sign of corruption. The paranoia was justified. The armored figure's rampage had exposed fault lines in every village's security apparatus, revealed experiments and bargains that officially did not exist, forced examination of practices every nation had engaged in but none would acknowledge. Tsunade of Konohagakure spoke first. 17 facilities destroyed. 307 confirmed casualties. Unknown number of missing persons who may have fled or been eliminated in remote locations. Whatever this thing is, it has crippled our black operations infrastructure across 4 nations. She did not mention that Konoha's losses were the highest. Everyone in the room already knew. Onoki of Iwagakure leaned forward, his weathered face carved into deep lines by decades of difficult decisions. The targets were not random. Every confirmed casualty, every destroyed facility, every eliminated asset shared common factors. Demonic corruption, forbidden power sources, techniques that drew on forces outside standard chakra manipulation. You're saying it's hunting people like us, Mei Terumi of Kirigakure said bluntly. Shinobi who made difficult choices to protect their villages, who pursued power because the alternative was weakness, who did what was necessary. I'm saying it's applying a moral calculus we thought we had moved beyond, Onoki replied, and it has power sufficient to enforce that calculus, regardless of what we think about its legitimacy. A of Kumogakure slammed his fist on the table. Then we fight. We gather our forces, coordinate our Jinchuriki, and we eliminate this threat before it eliminates us. We've fought gods before. We can fight this. Can we? Gaara of Sunagakure's voice was quiet but carried weight that silenced the room. The 4 tails engaged this entity directly and withdrew on the edge of death. Our conventional forces have attempted combat 36 times across multiple battlefields. Casualties are 100% among those who engaged with corrupted chakra, and approximately 40% among those who were clean. It is not indiscriminate, but it is unstoppable by any measure we currently possess. Silence settled over the summit. Each cage understood the implications. If the armored figure could neutralize a tailed beast, could survive everything, shinobi armies could deploy, could identify corruption through methods that bypassed every concealment technique they possessed, then traditional warfare was not an option. The alternative was negotiation or capitulation, and neither sat well with leaders who had built their positions on strength. Tsunade broke the silence. We need to understand what it wants, where it came from, whether it can be reasoned with, or if we're dealing with a force of nature that simply eliminates what it classifies as demonic. I volunteer to make contact, Gaara said. Every eye in the room turned to the young Kazekage. Gaara met their stares with the calm of someone who had stared into darkness and emerged transformed. I am a Jinchuriki. I have walked the line between human and monster. If this entity truly distinguishes between corruption and humanity, then I am the logical choice to establish communication. And if it cannot be reasoned with, my death will provide valuable tactical intelligence. You can't be serious, I growled. Sending a Kage into potential suicide is necessary, Gaara interrupted, because the alternative is continuing to pretend we can solve this through force, and that delusion will kill more people than my death ever could. The vote was close, but ultimately the cage agreed. Gaara would attempt contact. The other villages would hold their forces in reserve and prepare contingencies for scenarios ranging from successful negotiation to the Kazekage's death and subsequent escalation to total war. It was not a good plan, but it was the only plan that acknowledged the reality of what they faced. Gaara departed the summit immediately. He traveled alone, carried by sand that responded to his will with the fluid precision of someone who had bonded with his tailed beast rather than simply containing it. Shukaku stirred within the seal, curious and wary. The One-Tail had heard what happened to Son Goku, had felt the echo of argent energy through the dimensional spaces where tailed beasts communed. The sensation had been unlike anything in Shukaku's existence, neither chakra nor natural energy, but something older and infinitely more violent. The Kazekage followed the trail of destruction north. The path was easy to track. Burned forests, scorched earth, settlements evacuated ahead of the armored figure's advance. Gaara passed through villages where civilians spoke in hushed tones about the metal demon who killed without mercy but never touched the innocent. Shrines where priests burned offerings to appease what they assumed was a wrathful kami. Outposts where shinobi had barricaded themselves in and waited for the storm to pass. He found the Doomslayer on the third day. The armored figure stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a valley that had once housed a research facility dedicated to extracting demon chakra from failed Jinchuriki. The facility was gone now, reduced to a crater filled with glass that had once been stone melted beyond its normal melting point. The Doomslayer was motionless, a statue of green armor and violent purpose backlit by the setting sun. Gaara descended slowly, sand forming a platform that lowered him to the ground 30 meters from the giant. "I am Gaara of Sunagakure," the Kazekage said, his voice carrying across the distance without shouting. "Fifth Kazekage and Jinchuriki of Shukaku the One-Tail. I have come to speak with you, if you will permit it." The Doomslayer turned, his visor angled toward Gaara, sensors cataloging the young man's chakra signature with thoroughness that left no secret unexamined. The seal network binding Gaara and Shukaku was sophisticated, bordering on elegant, a far cry from the crude implementations he had seen in other Jinchuriki. The corruption was present but controlled, managed through what his sensors interpreted as genuine symbiosis rather than parasitic exploitation. Gaara stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, making no move toward weapons or technique. "I know what you have done," Gaara continued. "I have seen the sites you cleansed, the corrupted shinobi you eliminated, the experiments you purged. I understand, perhaps better than most, the necessity of such actions. I was a monster once. I killed without thought or mercy. I was saved by someone who saw humanity where others saw only danger." The Doomslayer said nothing, but his stance shifted fractionally. "I do not ask you to spare those who deserve death," Gaara said, "but I ask you to understand that we are trying to change, that the shinobi world is not monolithic, that there are those among us who seek better paths than the ones our predecessors walked. Judge us individually rather than collectively. Give us the chance to prove we are more than our worst choices." For 10 seconds, the only sound was wind across stone. Then the Doomslayer reached up and removed his helmet. The face beneath was human but weathered beyond normal aging, skin marked by scars that predated recorded history, and eyes that held depths Gaara's own trauma could not fathom. The man was ancient and ageless simultaneously, his features carved by experiences that transcended normal human suffering. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, each word shaped with careful precision. "I have walked through hell," the Doomslayer said. "I have seen what corruption does to souls, what bargains with darkness cost in the long term. Your world is infected. Every village, every nation, every attempt to weaponize demons has created anchors they use to bleed into your reality. I came here because the breach was large enough to detect across dimensional boundaries. I will not leave until it is sealed." Gaara absorbed this with the calm of someone accustomed to bearing impossible burdens. How many must die? All who are corrupted beyond redemption. All who serve as anchors for demonic presence. All who have traded their humanity for power drawn from hell's depths. The Doomslayer's eyes held Gaara's gaze without flinching. "But not you. Not yet. Your bond with the beast is different. It does not consume. It coexists." "Then help us," Gaara said. not by killing everything you find, but by showing us how to identify corruption we have normalized, by teaching us to seal the breaches we have opened in ignorance, by giving us the chance to cleanse ourselves before you decide we are beyond saving. The Doomslayer considered this. His entire existence had been defined by solitary crusade, by the understanding that mercy extended to demons only created opportunities for greater harm. But this was not hell. These were not demons, not entirely. The corruption was real. But so was the capacity for change he saw in the young man's eyes. The capacity he had once possessed himself, before eons of war had burned everything but rage from his soul. "Show me your seal network," the Doomslayer said finally. Gaara did not hesitate. He pulled down the collar of his robes, exposing the kanji that spiraled across his torso in patterns both beautiful and terrible. The Doomslayer stepped forward and placed one gauntleted hand over the seal. His armor interfaced with the chakra matrix, sensors analyzing the binding with precision that made Gaara gasp as he felt foreign presence examining the most intimate aspects of his being. For 30 seconds, the Slayer studied the seal. Then he withdrew his hand and nodded once. "Your containment is stable. The corruption is minimal and controlled. You are acceptable." He paused, and something almost like surprise crossed his scarred face. "The beast within you is not trying to escape. It protects you." "We are partners," Gaara said quietly. "It took years to achieve, but we have found balance. Balance." The Doomslayer tasted the word as if it were foreign. "Show me others who have achieved this balance. Show me the difference between those who master demons and those who are mastered by them. If your world truly has those who can walk the edge without falling, I will adjust my methodology." It was the closest thing to compromise Gaara would receive. Over the next 6 weeks, the Kazekage became the Doomslayer's guide to the shinobi world's hidden depths. They traveled together across all 5 great nations, examining seal networks, investigating sites of reported corruption, distinguishing between acceptable risk and uncontrolled infection. The Doomslayer's ability to perceive demonic taint proved invaluable. His senses could detect corruption weeks or months before it manifested in ways shinobi medical techniques could identify. They found more corruption than Gaara had feared. Entire programs dedicated to creating controllable demons. Black markets trading in demonic essence extracted from captured entities. Cults worshipping what they thought were gods but were actually demons patient enough to play the long game. Each discovery led to difficult decisions. Some sites the Doomslayer cleansed with fire, others where the corruption was minimal and the subjects willing to undergo purification, Gaara negotiated for alternative solutions. The Kazekage learned to read the Slayer's moods through subtle shifts in posture and weapon selection. When the helmet stayed on and the BFG 9000 deployed, negotiation was impossible. The corruption had metastasized beyond saving, and mercy would only spread infection. When the helmet came off and the Slayer examined subjects with his own eyes, Gaara had room to argue for rehabilitation rather than execution. The process was brutal and imperfect, but it established a framework both could accept. Not everyone survived the adjustment period. 3 weeks into their partnership, they encountered a hidden laboratory where Orochimaru's successors had been attempting to recreate their master's experiments in immortality. The methods involved binding fragments of greater demons into human hosts, creating chimeric entities that drew power from both chakra and hellfire. 17 test subjects remained alive, suspended in states of partial transformation that left them screaming in languages humans were not meant to comprehend. Gaara argued for containment and study. The Doomslayer eliminated all 17 in 90 seconds. The Kazekage stood in the aftermath, sand swirling around him in agitated patterns that reflected his anger and frustration. They could have provided intelligence, helped us understand how the corruption spreads, given us tools to counter it. "They were already dead," the Doomslayer replied, holstering his weapons. What remained was demon-wearing human memories. Keeping them alive would have provided the entities anchored in their flesh time to breach fully into your dimension. I have seen this pattern play out across a dozen worlds. The outcome is always the same. You're asking me to take your word over my own judgment. I'm asking you to understand that some knowledge has costs that exceed any benefit. You want to study how corruption spreads. I'm telling you that the act of study creates new vectors for infection. There is no safe way to examine demons, only faster and slower ways to be consumed. Gaara wanted to argue further, but the memory of Shukaku's terror when the Doomslayer had first arrived kept him silent. The One-Tail had recognized something in the armored figure that transcended normal threat assessment, something old and absolutely committed to a purpose that allowed no compromise where demons were concerned. They continued their journey. Katsuro Hyuga heard about the partnership through medical channels and understood, with the insight of someone who had witnessed the beginning, that the shinobi world was being offered a choice. Accept guidance from something older and infinitely more experienced in fighting corruption, or continue down paths that would eventually lead to the kind of purge that left nothing but ashes. The Hyuga medic did not know if his world would choose wisely. He suspected it would not. 6 weeks after the Doomslayer's arrival, the villages convened another summit. This time, Gaara came with documentation, seal diagrams showing corrupted networks the Slayer had identified, testimonies from shinobi who had undergone purification procedures the giant had approved, statistical analysis demonstrating that villages which cooperated with the purge experienced lower casualties than those that resisted. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. The shinobi world had been playing with demonic fire for decades, and the bill had come due. Tsunade reviewed the documents with growing horror. These seal designs, half of these are based on forbidden techniques my grandfather banned after the First War. How did they survive? Knowledge always survives, Onoki said grimly. We preserved it because we thought we might need it someday. We were fools. We were pragmatic, I countered. Every village here has programs that pushed ethical boundaries. We did it because our enemies did it, because the alternative was weakness. Are we supposed to apologize for trying to protect our people? You're supposed to recognize when protection becomes corruption, Gaara said quietly. When the methods you use to defend your village create the very threats you sought to prevent. The Doomslayer is not asking for apologies. He's offering expertise in identifying and eliminating corruption before it metastasizes. The question is whether we're wise enough to accept. Mei Terumi studied the Kazakage with calculating eyes. You trust this thing, this weapon that has killed hundreds of our people. Why? Because I've seen what he spares, Gaara replied. He has killed without hesitation, yes. But he has also walked away from Jinchuriki he could have eliminated, from research programs he could have destroyed, from individuals who made mistakes but retained their humanity. He distinguishes between acceptable risk and corruption. We should learn from that rather than fighting it. The debate lasted 6 hours. In the end, the vote was 3 in favor, 2 abstaining. The shinobi world would accept the Doomslayer's presence and cooperate with his purge under conditions that preserved village sovereignty and prevented unilateral action without intelligence sharing. It was a compromise nobody liked, which meant it was probably the best they could achieve. The Doomslayer received word of the agreement through Gaara and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he nodded once. Acceptable. I will coordinate with designated liaisons from each village. Provide complete intelligence on all programs involving demonic essence, corrupted chakra, or entities from dimensions adjacent to hell. In exchange, I will distinguish between those who can be saved and those who must be eliminated. Violations of this agreement will result in unilateral action. It was not quite a threat, but everyone understood the implications. Over the next 3 months, the shinobi world underwent a purge that would have been unthinkable before the Doomslayer's arrival. Dozens of black sites were identified and cleansed. Hundreds of compromised individuals underwent procedures ranging from seal modification to complete chakra network reconstruction. Those too corrupted to save were eliminated quickly, their deaths documented, and their villages compensated according to formulas that acknowledged the necessity while providing restitution. The process was brutal but effective. Demon breaches that had plagued certain regions for decades sealed themselves when their anchors were eliminated. Cult activity dropped by 70% as worshippers realized their gods were being systematically exterminated. Black market trade in demonic essence collapsed when the Doomslayer made it known that anyone involved in such commerce would be treated as corrupted regardless of their actual exposure. But success came with costs. Trust between villages eroded as intelligence sharing revealed just how extensively every nation had engaged in forbidden research. Political alliances fractured when villages accused each other of hiding the true extent of their corruption. 3 minor villages attempted to continue demon-binding programs in secret and were reduced to scorched earth when the Doomslayer detected their activities through sensor sweeps. The shinobi world began to fracture along new fault lines. Those who accepted the purge as necessary versus those who saw it as tyrannical overreach. Those who trusted the Doomslayer's judgment versus those who feared his power. Those who believed the world could change versus those who thought the corruption ran too deep to ever fully eliminate. The divisions were not clean along village lines, which made them all the more dangerous. Katsuro Hyuga found himself on the front lines of the ideological battle. As a medic with Byakugan sight, he could verify corruption in ways most shinobi could not. His assessments carried weight in councils debating whether individuals should undergo purification or elimination. The responsibility aged him in ways combat never had. Every decision meant someone lived or died based on his ability to distinguish between demonic taint and normal chakra irregularities. He made mistakes. 3 times he cleared individuals who later manifested corruptions he had missed. Twice he flagged subjects as corrupted who turned out to be suffering from rare but natural chakra mutations. The errors haunted him, and when the Doomslayer heard about the medic's struggles, he sought Katsuro out personally. They met in a Konoha medical facility where the Hyuga was reviewing scans of a suspected corruption case. The Doomslayer entered without knocking, his armored bulk filling the doorway in ways that made the room feel suddenly claustrophobic. Katsuro looked up from his work, Byakugan active, and saw through the armor to the ancient warrior beneath. The sight was less comforting than he had hoped. "You carry guilt," the Doomslayer observed, "for the mistakes." Katsuro deactivated his Byakugan and met the giant's eyes with more courage than he felt. 3 people died because I failed to identify their corruption in time. 2 nearly died because I identified corruption that didn't exist. Yes, I carry guilt. Good. The Doomslayer pulled up a chair that creaked under his weight and sat across from the medic. Guilt means you understand the stakes. Absence of guilt would mean you'd stopped seeing them as people. That's when mistakes become atrocities. How do you live with it? Katsuro asked. You've killed hundreds, maybe thousands. How do you bear that weight? I remember that every demon I kill would have killed thousands if I had spared it. That every corruption I purge would have spread to innocence if I had hesitated. The weight is bearable because the alternative is heavier. The Doomslayer leaned forward, his scarred face showing hints of the man he had been before hell. But I also remember that I'm not infallible. That certainty is the enemy of wisdom. You will make mistakes. Accept them. Learn from them. Don't let them paralyze you, but don't forget them either. Katsuro absorbed this in silence. Then he gestured to the scans on his desk. This case. The corruption markers are borderline, could be demonic taint, or could be exposure to a tailed beast during the last war. Your senses are better than my eyes. What do you see? The Doomslayer studied the scans with professional thoroughness, his gauntlet interfacing with the medical equipment in ways that made the machinery spark and whine. After 30 seconds, he spoke. Natural exposure. The signature is degrading rather than spreading. Recommend monitoring but no intervention. Relief washed through Katsuro so powerfully he felt dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me. Trust your training and refine your methods. You have good instincts. Develop them. The Doomslayer stood, the chair groaning with relief. Your world is healing. It will take years, maybe decades, but the infection is being controlled. People like you are why I believe it's possible. He left without waiting for a response. Katsuro sat alone in the medical bay, staring at scans that now represented hope rather than uncertainty. The Doomslayer's words had been neither kind nor comforting, but they had been true. That was worth more than comfort. 4 months after his arrival, the Doomslayer detected something new. His sensors, which had been passively monitoring dimensional boundaries since the purge began, registered a massive spike in demonic activity, concentrated in a location that should have been geologically impossible. The readings suggested a breach point unlike anything he had encountered in the shinobi world, large enough to allow a greater demon direct access, maintained by a power source that registered as neither chakra nor argent energy but something that predated both. He brought the readings to Gaara. The Kazekage reviewed the data with growing dread. These coordinates. That's the location of the Sage of Six Paths' final resting place. The site where he supposedly sealed the 10 tails before separating it into the 9-tailed beasts. It's been considered mythologically significant, but otherwise inactive for over 1,000 years. It's active now, the Doomslayer said grimly, and whatever is using it as an anchor is powerful enough to warp space-time in a 50-kilometer radius. This isn't a minor corruption, this is a full demonic incursion in the making. Gaara felt Shukaku stir within the seal, the one-tail's unease bleeding through their connection. If you're right, this could explain why the shinobi world developed so much susceptibility to demonic influence. If there's been a breach point at the foundations of our power system from the beginning, then your entire civilization is built on compromised ground, the Doomslayer finished. Yes, that's my assessment. The implications were staggering. If the Sage's seal had been corrupted from the moment of its creation, if the tailed beasts themselves carried demonic taint woven into their fundamental nature, then the shinobi world's relationship with chakra was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Every jutsu, every technique, every advancement had potentially been drawing on a poisoned well. Gaara made the call to the other Kage within the hour. They convened via long-range communication seals, their faces projected in holographic form above the war table in Tsunagakurei's command center. The Kazekage presented the Doomslayer's findings without embellishment. When he finished, silence dominated the connection for 10 full seconds. Tsunade spoke first. You're suggesting the foundation of shinobi civilization is corrupted, that everything we've built might be tainted at the source. I'm suggesting it's a possibility we need to investigate, Gaara replied. If the Doomslayer's sensors are accurate, and they have been accurate on every other assessment, then there is a demonic presence anchored at the site of our most sacred seal. We need to determine what it is, how deep the corruption runs, and what it means for our future. And if the corruption is fundamental, Onoki asked, if it can't be separated from the chakra system itself, what then? The Doomslayer leaned into the projection field, his scarred face filling the holographic space with disturbing intensity. Then you learn to function without chakra, or you accept that your entire civilization will eventually be consumed by the entities you've been feeding with every technique you perform. Those are the only options when the foundation is poisoned. As slammed his fist on his own war table hard enough that the impact reverberated through the connection. I will not accept that generations of shinobi built their lives on demonic corruption. We are warriors, not thralls. Then prove it, the Doomslayer replied. Come with me to the seal site. Bring your best sensors, your most skilled seal masters, your strongest Jinchuriki. We investigate together, and whatever we find, we face with full knowledge rather than comfortable ignorance. The vote was unanimous this time. Within 24 hours, a strike team assembled in Sunagakure. Each village sent their finest, Kakashi Hatake from Konoha, representing both SEAL expertise and combat capability. Kuratsuchi from Iwa, young but brilliant in Earth-style techniques that might be needed for excavation. Darui from Kumo, lightning-style specialist and tactical genius. Chojuro from Kiri, wielding Hiramekare and representing his village's redemption from bloody past. And Gaara himself, Kazekage and Jinchuriki, anchor point for the mission's purpose. Katsuro Hyuga came as medical support, his Byakugan sight considered essential for mapping whatever they found. The journey to the sage's seal site took 3 days. They traveled through territories that had been abandoned for centuries, places where chakra behaved strangely and wildlife had evolved into forms that suggested long-term exposure to energies humans were not meant to channel. The land itself felt wrong to Katsuro's penetrating sight, spatial dimensions folding at angles that violated Euclidean geometry. By the second day, even shinobi without sensory abilities could feel the pressure. The seal site lay within a crater that should not exist according to geological surveys. The depression was perfectly circular, 3 kilometers in diameter, with walls so smooth they reflected light like polished glass. At the center stood a structure that predated known architecture, a ziggurat built from stone that hummed with resonant frequencies when approached. Katsuro's Byakugan showed him something that made his breath catch. The entire structure was a 3-dimensional seal array of complexity that made his eyes water trying to follow the connections. The Doomslayer's senses painted a grimmer picture. Demonic presence confirmed, he reported, studying his gauntlet's readouts with professional calm. The signature is massive and ancient. Whatever is bound here has been present for over a millennium. The seal is holding, but barely. Degradation rate suggests complete failure within 5 to 10 years. Can it be reinforced? Kakashi asked, Sharingan already analyzing the visible seal components. Unknown. The seal structure is beyond my expertise. But I can tell you that attempting to reinforce something this complex without understanding its original purpose risks accelerating the failure. The Doomslayer looked at the assembled shinobi. We need to go inside, determine what was sealed and why. Only then can we decide whether to reinforce, modify, or destroy the entire structure. Nobody argued. The entrance was sealed behind barriers that had weakened over centuries of neglect. The Doomslayer placed his hand against the stone and channeled argent energy through his gauntlets in patterns that resonated with the seal's fundamental frequencies. The barriers recognized the energy signature ancient power calling to ancient power and parted like curtains. The path opened. They descended into darkness lit by veins of chakra that pulsed through the stone. The interior was vast, chamber after chamber descending into the earth in a spiral that seemed to have no bottom. The walls were covered in scripture that predated modern language, kanji so old they had evolved into the characters shinobi use today. Katsuro activated his Byakugan and nearly screamed. The chambers were not empty. They contained thousands of figures, humanoid shapes suspended in stasis that his sight could not fully penetrate. What are they? He whispered. Gaara's sand swirled in agitated patterns as he approached the nearest figure. I think these are the original shinobi. The people who served the sage before he created the tailed beasts. They're not dead, they're sealed. The Doomslayer scanned one of the figures and felt something cold settle in his chest. They're not sealed, they're being used. Look at the chakra flow. It's not going into them, it's being drawn out. These people are batteries, have been for 1,000 years. Realization crashed through the team like a physical blow. The seal was not containing something demonic. It was powered by something demonic. using thousands of human souls as fuel to maintain a structure whose true purpose had been hidden behind layers of mythology and deliberate obfuscation. The Sage of Six Paths had not created a monument to peace. He had built a machine, and that machine was feeding something in the depths below. They continued descending. The spiral took them deeper than should be possible, past the point where even chakra-enhanced excavation should have encountered the planet's mantle. But the chambers continued, lit by that pulsing not-quite chakra that made Katsuro's Byakugan ache. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the bottom. The final chamber was a sphere carved from a single piece of stone larger than Konoha. At its center, suspended in chains forged from crystallized chakra and bound by seals that made the outer barriers look like children's exercises, hung something that Katsuro's eyes refused to see clearly. His Byakugan showed him layers of conflicting information: a humanoid figure, a beast with 10 tails, a mass of pure malevolent energy, a god wearing the skin of mortality. The forms overlapped and contradicted, existing simultaneously in ways that violated every law of nature the medic understood. The Doomslayer raised his weapons without hesitation. "That's the 10 tails," Gaara said, sand coiling around him in defensive spirals. "Or what remains of it. The Sage didn't seal it. He's been feeding it, using those people upstairs as a power source to keep it alive in a state of suspended transformation." "Why?" Kakashi's Sharingan tracked the chains, mapping their structure with desperate precision. What possible purpose could justify this? The answer came from the entity itself. The 10 tails spoke with a voice that was not sound but rather concept, forced into linguistic shape. "I am the bridge. I am the conduit. I am the price paid for your precious chakra." Understanding crashed through them in waves of horror. Chakra, the energy that defined shinobi civilization, that powered every technique from academy basics to Kage-level devastation, was not a natural force. It was demonic energy filtered through a living transformer. The 10 tails was not sealed to protect the world. It was sealed to provide the world with power drawn from hell itself. Every jutsu ever performed, every technique ever mastered, every advancement in shinobi capability had been purchased with fuel siphoned from dimensions that should never have touched their reality. The shinobi world was built on hell's foundation. "How long?" the Doomslayer asked, his voice perfectly level despite the implications. "How long have you been feeding this world demonic power?" "Since the Sage made his bargain. Since he chose power over purity. Since your ancestors decided they would rather be strong than clean." Katsuro felt his worldview shatter and reform into something darker. Every medical technique he had learned, every healing jutsu he had performed, every life he had saved with chakra-enhanced procedures had been drawing on power that originated in hell. He had been a conduit for corruption without knowing it. They all had been. Gaara stepped forward, his voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Then the tailed beasts are fragments of my power, given form to hide the truth. 9 prisons to contain 9 portions of my essence, distributed among your people so that all would share the corruption. The Sage was thorough in his deception. The one tail stirred within Gaara's seal, and for the first time in years, the Kazekage felt Shukaku's voice clearly. "He speaks truth, Kit. We knew. All of us knew. We're pieces of something older and fouler than your world has names for." The Sage thought he could control it, thought he could filter the power until it was safe. He was wrong. Silence dominated the chamber. Then the Doomslayer lowered his weapons and spoke with finality that brooked no argument. "This ends now. The seal will be destroyed. The 10 tails will be eliminated. Your world will learn to function without chakra, or it will die clean rather than live corrupted." "You're talking about destroying our entire way of life," Darui said, lightning crackling around his hands in patterns of stress rather than intent. "Billions of people depend on chakra for everything from agriculture to medicine. You'll kill more people than the demons ever could. You're already dying, the Doomslayer countered. Slowly. Every generation more corrupted than the last. Every technique drawing you deeper into hell's influence. You think the wars, the hatred, the cycle of violence is natural? It's the corruption eating at your souls. The Ten Tails' presence warps everything it touches, including human nature. You were meant to be better than this. Katsuro found his voice. Is there no alternative? No way to filter the chakra clean or seal the corruption at its source? The Doomslayer studied the medic for a long moment. There's always an alternative. But every alternative I've seen civilizations attempt when facing this choice has ended the same way. Slow death instead of fast. Corruption spreading until it consumes everything. I've watched a dozen worlds fall because they thought they could manage demonic power safely. I will not watch another. Then, you'll have to go through us, Kakashi said quietly. The Sharingan tracked the Doomslayer with the focus of someone preparing to die fighting. Around him, the other elite shinobi readied themselves, chakra flaring in colors and patterns that painted the chamber with deadly light. The Doomslayer did not raise his weapons. I've killed things that make you look like children. I've ended gods and walked away. If you force this confrontation, you will die, and your deaths will change nothing. The seal is failing. Within a decade, the Ten Tails will break free on its own. I'm offering you the choice to end this cleanly, with time to adapt. Don't waste that gift. Gaara raised his hand, and the other shinobi paused. The Kazekage approached the Ten Tails, sand swirling in patterns that suggested deep thought rather than aggression. He stood before the chained entity, young face carved into lines too old for his years, and spoke. You said the sage made a bargain. What were the terms? Power for his people, purchased with his soul and the souls of those who served him. He thought he could contain the cost, limit the corruption, create a system where humans could wield demonic strength without becoming demons themselves. Did it work? For a time. But corruption is patient. It waits. It spreads. It adapts. Now your world is so saturated with my essence that removing it would be like removing blood from a living body. Possible, but fatal. Gaara turned to face the Doomslayer. You said you've seen this before. Did any of those worlds survive? The ancient warrior was silent for 10 seconds. One, he finally admitted. One world survived by burning out every person who carried more than trace corruption. They lost 90% of their population. The survivors rebuilt from almost nothing, but they rebuilt clean. It took 3 generations to reach a fraction of their former capability. Most of their history was lost. Their civilization was less than it had been. But it survived, Gaara pressed. Clean, free of corruption. Yes? The Kazekage looked at his fellow shinobi, reading their faces with the skill of someone who had learned to see beneath the surface. He saw fear, anger, denial, but also, underneath, a growing acceptance. They had all known, on some level, that the shinobi world's relationship with power was unhealthy. They had simply never imagined it was this fundamentally broken. I propose a third option, Gaara said, voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. We don't destroy the seal immediately. We don't preserve it as is. We modify it. Use the time we have years, you said, to gradually reduce our dependence on chakra, develop alternative methods, train the next generation differently, and when the seal finally fails, we destroy the Ten Tails completely, accepting whatever cost that brings, but doing so with our eyes open and our people prepared. The Ten Tails laughed, a sound like mountains grinding together. They will not do it. Humans never relinquish power willingly. They will find excuses, justifications, reasons why today is not the day to change. They will lie to themselves until the day I break free and consume them all. Maybe, Gaara acknowledged. Maybe you're right. and we're too weak, too addicted, too corrupt to save ourselves. But maybe, just maybe, we're capable of more than you think. You're a demon. What do you know about human capacity for change?" The Doomslayer watched this exchange with something approaching interest. He had seen countless civilizations face this moment. Most chose denial. Some chose defiance. Very few chose the path Gaara was proposing, acknowledging the corruption while fighting to overcome it gradually rather than catastrophically. It was the hardest path, the one with the lowest success rate, but also, potentially, the one that preserved the most of what made the civilization worth saving. "How would this work?" the Doomslayer asked. Gaara gestured to the suspended figures lining the chambers above. "We free them. Everyone the sage imprisoned to power this seal. We accept the consequences of the seal degrading faster without their energy. Use that urgency to motivate change. Then we work with you and anyone else who has fought this kind of corruption to develop methods of functioning without chakra. Agriculture, medicine, defense, everything. You're talking about dismantling everything shinobi culture has built over 1,000 years, Kurotsuchi said. Everything that makes us what we are. I'm talking about saving what we are beneath the power, Gaara countered. The ingenuity, the dedication, the will to protect what we love. Those things don't require chakra. They're human qualities the chakra has been masking. Maybe it's time we rediscovered them. Kakashi studied the Kazekage with his visible eye. You realize this will cause chaos, political upheaval, probably civil war as factions refuse to accept the necessity. Yes, I realize. But the alternative is either immediate collapse if we destroy the seal now, or certain doom if we do nothing. This is the only path where we have a chance. Gaara turned to the Doomslayer. Will you help us? Not just with the purge, but with the transition? You've seen other worlds face this. You know what works and what doesn't. The Doomslayer was silent for a long time. Then he sheathed his weapons. I will stay. I will help. But understand if your world fails to follow through, if the corruption spreads instead of receding, if I determine the experiment has failed, I will end it myself, completely. No second chances. Understood, Gaara said. They sealed the agreement in the shadow of the 10 Tails, with the weight of 1,000 years of deception pressing down on them and the certainty of catastrophic change ahead. Then they began the work of freeing the imprisoned shinobi, knowing each release would accelerate the seal's failure and force the world to confront truths it had been denying since its inception. The first freed shinobi woke screaming. Katsura was there to treat him, using medical techniques that felt suddenly poisonous now that he understood their source. The man had been imprisoned for over 1,000 years, his chakra drained continuously to power a seal designed to make his sacrifice invisible. When he finally understood what had happened, what he had been used for, he wept. Then he listened to Gaara explain the choice the world now faced. He chose to help. Over the next weeks, they freed all 1,000+ imprisoned shinobi, and each one made the same choice. They had paid the price of the sage's bargain with their lives and their freedom. They would not allow future generations to pay with their souls. Many of them possessed knowledge from before chakra became universal, techniques and methods that had been forgotten in the rush to exploit the 10 Tails' power. They began teaching anyone who would listen. The world resisted. Factions emerged that denied the corruption, claimed the Doomslayer was manipulating everyone, insisted the 10 Tails was lying to sow discord. Violence erupted as traditionalists fought against reformers. 3 minor villages attempted to create their own demonic pacts, hoping to replace the 10 Tails' power with controllable alternatives. The Doomslayer eliminated each attempt with extreme prejudice, and the message spread. There would be no bargaining with demons, no attempts to preserve power through corruption. The path forward was clean, or it was death. Katsuro Hyuga became one of the movement's most visible advocates. His Byakugan allowed him to demonstrate corruption in real time, showing audiences exactly how chakra techniques drew on the Ten Tails' essence and warped the user's spiritual pathways. He trained a new generation of medics in techniques that relied on natural energy rather than chakra, methods that were less powerful but infinitely more sustainable. The work was exhausting and frequently dangerous. He survived 3 assassination attempts by groups that saw him as destroying shinobi culture, but he persevered. 5 years after the Doomslayer's arrival, the seal finally failed. The Ten Tails broke free not with violence but with a kind of terrible inevitability, chains shattering as the power sustaining them dispersed beyond recovery. The entity rose from its prison for the first time in a millennium, 10 massive tails lashing in patterns that carved canyons through the surrounding landscape. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrible, a being of such concentrated malice that its mere presence caused wildlife to flee for hundreds of kilometers. The Doomslayer was waiting. He stood alone in the creature's path, armored in the Praetor suit that had survived eons of warfare, armed with weapons forged in heaven and tempered in hell. The BFG 9000 hung at his side, charged with enough argent energy to crack a continent. The crucible burned in his right hand, blade wreathed in flames that answered to no mortal authority. The Ten Tails paused. "You cannot kill me, Slayer. I am woven into this world's fundamental structure. Destroying me will destroy everything that draws on chakra. Billions will die. Then they die clean," the Doomslayer replied. "Better that than living as your puppets. The Kazekage's plan has failed. Your world still runs on my power, still depends on the corruption I provide. You cannot wean a civilization from demonic essence in 5 years. No, but we can start, and starting is enough." The Doomslayer raised the BFG 9000. "You are not woven into this world's structure. You are a parasite wearing the skin of necessity. I've killed your kind before. I'll kill you now." The Ten Tails attacked. What followed was a battle that would be recorded in shinobi history as the day the world changed. The entity unleashed tailed beast bombs that vaporized mountains, created tsunami waves of corrupted chakra that turned fertile land to ash, shaped itself into forms drawn from humanity's deepest nightmares. The Doomslayer met every attack with violence calibrated to end gods. The BFG's first shot carved through 3 of the Ten Tails' appendages, argent energy disrupting demonic essence at the molecular level. The creature screamed and regenerated, but slower than before. The second shot vaporized its core body mass, forcing the entity to reassemble from distributed fragments. The third, fourth, and fifth shots came in rapid succession, each one stripping away layers of power that had taken millennia to accumulate. The crucible ended it. The Doomslayer charged through a wall of corrupted chakra that would have killed any shinobi instantly and drove the burning blade into the Ten Tails' central mass. The weapon was designed to sever the connection between demonic entities and the dimensions from which they drew power. When it pierced the Ten Tails, it cut not flesh but the fundamental link between the creature and hell itself. The Ten Tails fell. Its death was not explosive but rather a slow dissolution, power bleeding away like water from a broken vessel. The creature that had fueled shinobi civilization for over 1,000 years simply ceased to exist, dispersing into energy patterns that gradually faded to nothing. The Doomslayer stood over the corpse until the last ember of demonic essence died, then drove the crucible into the ground and knelt. He was exhausted in ways that transcended physical fatigue. Killing the Ten Tails had required channeling argent energy through his armor at levels that would have killed a lesser warrior. His muscles screamed, his bones ached, but it was done. The corruption that had poisoned this world since its inception was dead. What came next was up to the people who remained. Gaara arrived 3 hours later with a contingent of shinobi from all 5 great nations. They stood in a circle around the crater where the Ten Tails had died, staring at the scorched earth and the armored figure who knelt at its center. Nobody spoke for a full minute. Then the Kazekage broke the silence. "It's done?" "It's done," the Doomslayer confirmed. He rose slowly, servos in his armor whining with the effort. "The demonic anchor is destroyed. Your world is clean. What happens now depends entirely on you." Around them, shinobi were beginning to realize what the Ten Tails' death meant. Those with active chakra techniques felt their power guttering like candles in wind. Jutsu that had been second nature suddenly required conscious effort to maintain. The ambient energy that had saturated the world since the sage's bargain was dissipating, and with it went the supernatural advantages that had defined shinobi civilization. Some panicked. Others wept. A few began to laugh with something approaching hysteria. Katsuro Hyuga felt his Byakugan flicker. The Kekkei Genkai was failing, not completely, but noticeably. His vision, which had penetrated matter and energy with ease, now struggled to see through simple stone. The realization was terrifying and liberating simultaneously. He was losing the power that had defined his identity since childhood, but he was also losing the corruption that had come with it. Over the next months, the shinobi world learned to function without chakra. It was brutal. Agricultural systems that relied on Earth-style techniques to enhance crops failed, leading to food shortages that killed thousands before alternative methods could be implemented. Medical facilities that used chakra-enhanced healing saw mortality rates spike as they transitioned to conventional medicine. Defensive walls maintained by continuous jutsu crumbled, leaving villages vulnerable to attacks from conventional armies and wildlife they had previously dominated through supernatural force. But they adapted. The freed ancient shinobi taught methods that predated chakra dependency. Engineers developed technologies to replace jutsu-based infrastructure. Medics learned to trust surgical skill and herbal remedies over mystical healing. It was not a smooth transition. Civil wars erupted as factions fought over resources that were suddenly much more limited. Entire villages collapsed when their economies, built on chakra-based services, became obsolete overnight. Yet through it all, the corruption receded. Katsuro documented the change with tools that replaced his failing Byakugan. Spiritual pathways that had been twisted by demonic influence slowly returned to natural configurations. Mental illnesses that had plagued shinobi for generations, the madness that sometimes came from excessive chakra use, vanished as the corrupting influence lifted. Children born after the Ten Tails' death grew up cleaner than any generation in 1,000 years, free from the subtle warping that had been accepted as normal human nature. The Doomslayer stayed for 3 years. He helped establish protocols for identifying and eliminating residual corruption that survived the Ten Tails' death. Trained elite forces in methods of fighting without chakra, teaching them to rely on tactics, technology, and human ingenuity rather than supernatural power. Shared knowledge from other worlds that had undergone similar transitions, providing roadmaps through the darkness that was simultaneously more and less helpful than the shinobi had hoped. Then, one morning, he was gone. Gaara found the note in his office, written in surprisingly neat script on paper that showed no sign of the violence its author had enacted. The message was brief. "Your world is healing. The corruption is manageable. You no longer need me. Remember that power drawn from darkness always costs more than it seems. Choose light, even when it's harder. Especially when it's harder." The Doomslayer. The Kazekage stood on the roof of his office building and looked out over Sunagakure. The village was smaller than it had been, its population reduced by the chaos following the Ten Tails' death. But it was also cleaner, healthier, more genuine in ways he struggled to articulate. People lived shorter lives without chakra-enhanced medicine, but they lived fuller lives, unburdened by corruption that had eaten at their souls without their knowledge. Shukaku stirred within the seal, weaker but also more peaceful than the One Tail had been in centuries. He was right, you know. About everything. I know, Gaara said quietly. I hate that he was right, but I know. The shinobi world continued to change. Within a generation, chakra became something spoken of in history books rather than living practice. The stories of jutsu that could reshape landscapes were met with the same skepticism modern people apply to ancient myths. A few individuals retained the ability to manipulate natural energy without corruption, but they were rare and valued for their uniqueness rather than expected to be universal. Katsuro Hyuga lived to see his great-grandchildren born into a world that bore no resemblance to the one he had known as a young medic. His Byakugan had faded completely by then, leaving him with vision no sharper than any other aging man. But his knowledge, painstakingly recorded in texts that detailed both the corruption and its purging, ensured that future generations would understand what they had survived. On his deathbed, Katsuro was asked if he regretted the change, if he mourned the loss of the power that had defined shinobi civilization for 1,000 years. His answer was recorded by his granddaughter, preserved in archives that would outlast the memory of chakra itself. I regret every death the transition caused, every child who starved, every village that fell. But I do not regret the choice. We were dying slowly before he came. Poisoned by power we thought was our birthright. He showed us the cost and gave us the chance to pay it consciously rather than have it extracted from us in the final accounting. That was mercy, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. In the mountains where the Ten Tails had been sealed and then destroyed, a monument stood. It bore no name, only a simple inscription in the oldest form of kanji. Here ended the age of stolen power. Here began the age of earned wisdom. Pilgrims came occasionally to stand before it and contemplate the price their ancestors had paid for the clean world they now inhabited. None of them knew that similar monuments existed on a dozen worlds across multiple dimensions, marking places where the Doomslayer had enacted similar purgings. None of them knew he was still out there, still hunting corruption wherever it took root, still enforcing a moral calculus that allowed no compromise with demonic influence. They only knew that their world had been saved. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between sunset and full darkness, those with sensitive hearing reported a sound like thunder in the distance. A rhythmic pounding, like armored boots striking stone with mechanical precision. They told themselves it was imagination, echoes from the past, natural phenomena misinterpreted through the lens of old stories. But some, especially those who had lived through the purge, knew better. The Doomslayer walked eternal, hunting corruption across dimensions that would never fully appreciate the cost of his crusade or the mercy implicit in his violence. He asked for no gratitude, accepted no praise, wanted nothing but the endless war against forces that would devour humanity if given the chance. The shinobi world had been one more battlefield in an infinite war. And on that battlefield, for the first time in 1,000 years, light had won.